The subject is political theory and ideology. Who knows what we are talking about? He knows how to distinguish a political theory from an ideology. An ideology is a set of precepts, values and vision. A worldview of how not only a political economic system works, but how the world and political theory work. If it is a model of public functioning, such as institutions, governance, and these things well goes around. I mean, the theory is like higher. What do I mean? Great political philosophers make speeches. Vickers man, he was telling you that he couldn't see the theory. These are the great political philosophers of Plato, Aristotle. These people like that, so high, because they elaborate concepts, that they elaborate equality, justice, duty, things like that. They talk about freedom style. Then they already begin to argue without negative freedom, positive freedom, freedom as a domination. Then the political philosophers elaborate discourses regarding politics, but of a high intellectual level, of great capacity for abstraction. They discuss these big concepts, it's what we call theory. Ideologues then take those concepts and craft policy-oriented discourses. That is, this freedom is very well worth it. How we do, how it is concretized on a lower plane. That of freedom, freedom of chair, freedom of teaching, freedom of movement, freedom of vote, freedom of expression. We start to discuss what concrete thing we do a program, and that program is grouped, then it constitutes. The great ideologies are so designed to respect some issue, and what they usually do is contribute, base themselves on the great concepts of philosophy to elaborate a discourse and a political program of action. Let's say that the ideology is more of action and the other is more of reflection. But political ideology is based on ideas, theories, so previously worked out by philosophers. Philosophers, in principle, do not build a system, but think about something. Freedom, justice, equality. Things like that, and then people are convinced. I want a more equal society. One is elaborated on a socialist program, another, a republican program, another is drawn up in a style program. I am free, I want freedom above all. The great distinction, the great political category is left and right in this aspect. As Bob Bio says, as the ledger says, as the ancients say, freedom, the right are those who prioritize freedom and left are those who prioritize equality, but both are based on programs. Within the right there are several programs, and within the left there are several programs. We also understand the difference. Some do not throw eyes if big concepts is virtue. Citizenship is not virtuous, of course, but then it becomes a program. For example, Petty takes the concepts of that style and transforms them into a republican program, because there has to be more freedom in women, in the environment. It makes public policy elaborations. It transforms that theory into an ideology. Another point, I make a political ideology with any of its features. You are all many things at once, but if we ever talk about this, you are all many things at once. Lord, I who am for a vicar could. I am a woman, but if not, I am rich middle class, or I am an atheist, or I am a Christian. And he will say, for I am young and you are traveling. I can tell you about any of your traits. I am developing a political doctrine. For example, capitalism and socialism depends on whether you are rich or poor. This is whether you own the production or not. For the C or for the socialist, what distinguishes people is their wealth, it is their possession or not of the means of production, and it is the central thing, and everything is subordinate to that. It is the main struggle. In addition, as we will see, they are materialistic ideologies, that is, it is the material basis that determines consciousness. It is the material basis that ends the historical evolution, etc. For the Marxist, the main thing is wealth or poverty. For the nationalist, he will say no. The important thing is that you speak Spanish or you speak Quechua, which can be by language, it can be by race, it can be by religion, it can be other things. But at the beginning I record not as I am of race, that Kai and you are of white race, because we are already of different things. And since you speak one language and another, that's the main thing. It's what sets us apart. No, no, no. You are an atheist, as a good Randiano is an atheist. I am a believer, conservative, Catholic, I explain myself. That's the main difference. In fact, people historically, until the 17th century killed and fought for religion, Christians against Muslims, Christians, Catholics, against Protestants, and so on, and so on. The main contradiction was religious. So I make a religious political speech. I make a political speech based on his wealth. I make a political speech based on your race, careful. But there are also men and women, and lesbians and transsexuals. And we can elaborate a political discourse based on the objective reality that you are a woman, you are a man, you are a rooster, you are a lesbian, or you are a transsexual, or they call you LGTB doctrine. As you know, no, then we can make a speech out of it. And in fact, there are political doctrines that are called feminist, and there are masculinist political doctrines and some other macho policies. And there are queer or gender political doctrines, home and their thing like that. And there are, we don't see them every day. No, they don't say a feminist. When we talk about difference, the main contradiction is obviously that the woman is exploited by the man. Historically there is a patriarchal rule. So the main fight is the gender one. Or we haven't seen it. This. I can make any other feature of his hypothetical, a speech, for example, Chesterton no Chesterton. He was a great British novelist. Gilbert, that Chesterton was so, very right, was the Lord of Order. I didn't like the economic theory he has that is called distribution, but he was a cool guy. Nice to meet you. I recommend your reading. For example, Father Brown. The way of reasoning that the protagonists of this author have are all deductive. They are like the Austrians, everything logical, deductive. The Chat is a novel that is sent by Leon from Notting Hill there that tells us that there is a fight of the fat against the skinny, and the fight is that they fight against each other. And today Casares' Diary of the Pig wore the young fight against the old. The young are stronger and beat the old, but the old are smarter and cheat on them, and in the middle of the road, and they do a lot of things to them. I'll explain. It's not a very nice book for that. The main contradiction is forgiveness, it's old versus young. I say this Saturday in Diary in Memory of the Blind, or let's start there. In one of his books he tells of a struggle of the blind against those who see well. Now the question I ask you, which of these contradictions is the main one? None is an ideology. Then, each of you to adopt the ideology you want. All of them are objective traits. Yes, all these traits exist, and from each of them we elaborate and chop theories. Indeed, feminists begin to seek egalitarian discourses first. I know there is an inequality. Do not look, women are not oppressed and exploited, etc., and they are stinging from political philosophers who corroborate with their ideas 1,000 female slavery. They start looking for books like that, then the main contradiction is the woman. No, the main contradiction is that of the white race, of blacks, those who are exploited, and so on. Things like that is the discourse, for example, of those of Malcolm X or Marcus Garvey, who are the theorists of the expression of the Negro, and that you too. Obviously, objectively, with a few in hand, they are rich or they are poor, and objectively they are of one race, and objectively they are of one nation. Yes or no, see what the main contradiction is, because people adopt his and he thinks that his is the main contradiction. They don't know the old quarrel between Lenin and Alexandre Colte. Lenin was a Marxist and he was a feminist, and Alessandro Colte was a Marxist and a feminist. First it will come to socialism, and when socialism comes it will come to the liberation of women. And first it will come to the liberation of women, because it will come to socialism. Once liberated, women cannot see socialism. If the woman is not released, who is right of the two? Well, some will say, Alessandro is right. Lenin, for it is not very well known what the main contradiction is. A worker can vote right, a capitalist can vote left. Then yes, it depends on the contradiction you have. Maybe, because a Negro votes for such and you don't know. Each person subjectively adopts an ideology. Adopt a worldview based on ideologies. Ideologies are political programs aimed at satisfying some of these contradictions. That is, some of these contradictions, for them is the main one. We will talk about Marxismo, nationalism, feminism, environmentalism. Elmo is different because it is a different category, as we will talk about, because it is the only ideology that is not humanist, that says that it is humanist. Then he has a trap, but he supposedly puts himself ahead of the man. It is a contradiction between men or nature. For some, nature is more important than man. For others, man, nature, and we have to choose it. If any of you are psychologists, say the main thing is the Gaia, Mother Earth, and these things like that. But we understand the concept, and I tell you that, and the ideologies we will see. All of them are based on a main contradiction elaborated based on philosophers, ancient writers, literati, and establishing a discourse to liberate women, to liberate them. Usually ideologies also have a main contamination, but then they also address the other issues. That is, either she is a feminist and a socialist, or she can be a feminist and a capitalist, expressing herself that way. And it may be the eco-feminists who mix environmentalism with feminism. The eco-fascists, for example, there are many doctrines mixed up. It depends on each philosopher, on each writer which speech he elaborates and whether he is one of the followers, whether he is capable. After that, the idea of finding people who follow him and creating party political organizations that follow him. In principle, a priori, all these institutions are absurd and none of them are. That is, I can elaborate a speech if I have the sufficient capacity to generate followers, to generate political machines, these parties, unions, and based on ideology. My ideology will triumph if not, no. In fact, there are a lot of ideologies that go by the wayside simply because no one heeded them. But potentially all of them can develop, and all of them can be equal, left-handed, or equally valid. It also depends on how you see it. That's the first thing I wanted you to keep in mind, that ideology can be literally anything. They agree with us, they have something to comment on, and so I think they should see the ideologies. I suppose that each of you, and it is impossible that it is not so, you have some kind of division about the world, and each of you has a main contradiction. Then they talk, for example, about concepts such as common sense. And common sense is what we don't understand by common sense. The real world, this thing is like that, it is mediated by ideas. Another aspect, I am not a Marxist. Therefore, ideas are not subordinate to interests, but interests are subordinate to ideas. And it's hard. A lot of people don't get it. Not as now he became rich, now he became right-wing. I don't know how he made money when he was poor. To the left, when he got rich he was right-wing, or he did this, he changed his mind about the other one because he was interested in it. There is the idea or the species that there is a subordination of the idea to the interest, that what commands is interest. People want to earn money, people want to live well. People want more women, more alcohol, a good time. He doesn't want as many ideas as people tell me that way a lot of times. Be careful, those are ideas too. The idea of wanting to live well, and money and earn a lot of money was not explained to me. Living a hedonistic life is an idea. It was called hedonism, but you can be perfectly ascetic. That is, not all societies in the world are hedonistic. Not all societies in the world are skeptical. It depends on the vision you have of the world. The first thing is the idea that marks our interests. I will give an example. Until the 18th century, more or less in the economy, in labor relations, for example, a harmonious worldview. They read Condorcet, Condillac, especially Bastiat. And political philosophers and fathers advocated a harmonious worldview. This they said, look, the interest of the worker and the interest of the employer are united. That is, the better the employer does, the better the worker does. Because of course, if the boss earns more money, the worker's salary will probably go up. Probably the worker, at least he won't get fired. The worker probably has the possibility of moving up in the company, whatever. Both win with the relationship. That is, there is no contradiction between one and the other. On the other hand, from the 19th century onwards, some philosophers, including Marx, defended a dialectical worldview. This is that the interest of one of the boss is at the expense of the worker, and vice versa. The worker's interest is to harm the boss who earns less. I don't know why. I believe more in the first, but regardless of what of my beliefs, adopt one or another position, you have to change the interests. I don't know if I can explain myself. If the worker who reads Bastiat's books here at UNI or is told about him becomes a harmonious being, it does not change the relationship between interests. I'm not interested in my employer selling a lot. I'm interested in my employer making a lot of money. I am interested in my company doing well. I'm interested, therefore, I'm not going to make strikes. I'm not going to make fights or anything like that. And if the same harmonic worker changes to dialectical, what happens to him, then he will strike. The boss is stealing from me, taking my money, exploiting me, doing a lot of things to me. I'm going to strike him, I'm going to boycott him. I'm going to do a lot of things for him to give me what he's stealing from me. Yes or no, depending on my idea of the world, my interest will be one or the other. Yes or no, go to your extremes. Take, for example, the Romans. The Romans were there with their religion. They lived there, they made their bacchanalia and their Bacchus parties, and they made their expenses. They lived like this, a bacchanal. God Bacchus. It was parties, so what? Drinking, or they drank and they had orgies and a certain kind of thing. But suddenly, a preacher, an apostle, so converse and become Christians. Their interest changes. They go from giving priority to earthly life, pleasure, vice and things like that, to giving priority to spiritual life and looking for the afterlife of things like that, to the point that people who used to be, let's say they lived, well, life and enjoyed like that, and they go to martyrdom singing. I don't explain to me why his interest changed his idea and changed his interest. Their interest, instead of living life and enjoying it, and so on, he spent in looking for the afterlife, in enjoying the world. Coming, then they were going to martyrdom, they were going to be killed in the circus, counting because they were going to enter the new world of God. I do not explain myself, I repeat, regardless of who is right about the two positions, the change of ideas has changed the interests, yes or no. I mean, that, ultimately, is my opinion. The idea determines the interest, not the other way around. And the idea is something autonomous. The idea is something that arises in our heads. The idea is something that we adapt and adopt. Ideas that come from ideologists, from thinkers who explain the whole world to us. Each of you explained the world to him in your schools, your parents, in your parishes, or the committees of the Party of the Republic, or wherever it is like that.
Say a question. You said to determine it.
Interest does not determine, but yes, I think it does determine. Ultimately, we are beings who cooperate with ideas and our interests what we want to do. I who want to earn a lot of money. Look, you want to earn a lot of money, have a silver, and have a handsome boyfriend, a handsome man. That's his worldview. I can't explain, no, but it's not the interest. No, if you're interested, I want that. Your interest is that. I am interested in having a lot of money. I am interested in having a handsome boyfriend. I am interested in having a lot of fun. That is his interest, which is mediated by a philosophical worldview that is now the predominant one in the Moderna world we live in. I am against the Moderna world. The Moderna will not be punished. The Moderna is the punishment. So he said, so said Don Nicolas Gomez de Villa. In peace, rest, a trip, a literary or Colombian trip that I wrote so many things of these I explained to myself. You have a worldview, probably hedonistic, because you are young Moderna, that there are few ascetics here. This is how I see myself thinking about meditating, retiring to a monastery to meditate on life. You, from what I see, are very hedonistic. You want good alcohol, you want good tobacco, you want good women, or well, yes, good cars and good clothes, right? I mean, they are hedonists, but let's face it, a philosophy is a philosophy that says that the main thing in life. First, he says that there is no afterlife, there is no transcendence. And secondly, what matters is living life here. It's the damn carpe diem, which I hate with all my soul. But it's an idea, it's not an idea, it's a philosophy. And I tell you who described it, Democritus and other Roman philosophers were the first invented. And that's an idea that triumphs and triumphs and triumphs. There you have it. A materialistic Sophia idea. And if you would make them great ascetics. Look, for example, look at these people from the Islamic State, because they are young. In Spain there were several, because they were girls, just as you or boys are you who were with your life drinking alcohol, smoking. They drank their life. They suddenly said that they were changing their lives, they were going to die for Allah, they were going to die and they were going to die for Allah. I'll explain. They went there to fight the Moderna world, but it was an idea. They changed their minds and changed their interests. They went from wanting to drink, smoking to being happy. If they are there fighting for the cause, that explains to me because they changed their mind, then their interests changed. Well, I have a question on this one. Well, in the end it is a very deterministic point of view. No, and in the end these are ideas that are transferred from one to another. So you would be saying that to some extent the collective does, that is, it limits the freedom of self-determination of that set of ideas. Because although I understand that we ourselves choose our own contradictions in some kind of individuality, these contradictions in any form, under what you are saying, it seems to me that they are determined by others, that is, it does not depend. I guess it will be like fashion is a regression problem. If fashion, but who is the first to start it, then I'll explain. Someone in the first instance had to start this or that fashion. Someone in particular had to start this or that political philosophy. Someone in particular had to initiate the first one, their religion, their regression test. There always has to be a first who invents fashion or invents the thing. The others copy it itself, but copy the first and adopt it whether it suits you or not. Yes, there are gregarious mechanisms. Yes, there are group mechanisms, but I think that all teams are autonomous. That is, at any time they can decide to go to a monastery. That is not likely does not mean that it is impossible. Let's not confuse probability. The probability is very low, but it is not impossible that some of you to the monastery or change philosophy will convert. I don't know if anything prevents you from being so comfortable here, but nothing prevents you from changing your mind or starting a new philosophy. If he succeeds, it's not up to him, his ability, or so I explain, but nothing prevents it. So I'm talking about that aspect of a certain autonomy of ideas, how they come out or arise. I don't know, it's just mental processes. There are many people who are determinists who say that ideas come given, that we have no other. For example, Marxists say that ideologies are given by consciousness. Later, when they talk about massa, I'll say why I don't agree with that, but basically it's this. We are going to talk about the main ideas, and we will also talk about some issues that distinguish between ideology and utopia. For example, it is the title that distinguishes utopias, which are unrealizable projects, because yes, they are projects that serve as a guide, orientation to the rest, and ideologies that are oriented more to action, more to concrete and real action, to create ulterior futures. So the first thing I wanted to clarify was that, the importance of ideas, that ideas arise in our heads. The process, I don't know, we should introspect. I guess it will be part of their own brain combined with the books they read, the ideas they are given, the world they live, etc. It's inside their heads and the ideologies they adopt. Well, I don't know exactly why. It can be by imitation of others, by the companies with which they go, by what they teach at the university, by many different things. But of course those ideas are there. What I want to explain the different ideologies, and obviously I also have ideology. I do not exclude myself, and I obviously think that my ideology is the right one, etc., etc. In a process of discussion, or so we can determine by the failures of one and the other. But I think that ideas in a certain way are acquired almost religiously, almost without discussion. Each of you has an ideology, and we are all, including me, very reluctant to change them. I show you how mental vision and everything that is not like that seems wrong to us, wrong and things like that. Therefore, when you explain a new ideology to another person, the person probably doesn't like you or calls you or has some insult prepared. Fascist, communist, fascio. There are many words to call those of other ideas, communist red. That is, if there are not many words of this style, then in this course I am going to talk about what I understand to be the main ideologies. I don't want to say that they are better, but they are more or less the ones that succeeded, and I'm going to explain a little. I'm going to criticize them, and obviously I'm going to defend mine. Yes, because I don't believe in ideological neutrality. I don't think we are neutral. You think it's impossible. And more is my opinion too. If you don't see it from the moment I choose the topics and I choose the examples, it wouldn't be neutral in the importance I give it. I'm neutral. I explain to myself, for example, I explain Marxism and I do not explain to you, for example, degrowth, or I explain religion. I do not explain to you the low doctrine. I cannot explain all the doctrines, all the ideas I select from the moment I select is no longer neutral. I select the ones that seem most important to me. But anyway, the question that I also ask you in these first sessions is what manipulates the most? To say that I manipulate or to say that I do not manipulate, to say that I manipulate, no, that I do not manipulate. You argue, Miss Solina, or you, how is your name, Miss, how is your name, Isabel?
Why don't I manipulate you? What would I say if I hear that I don't manipulate? Then I would think that people are more attentive to see if I don't manipulate. Instead, if I say yes, if I manipulate.
People are not so aware, but if I say that I manipulate and I am giving a speech, you with me take distances and you begin to see things as with more coldness, you begin to take distance. If I tell them that I do not manipulate, that mine is pure science, so I believe it. At least I explain it in a neutral way. How do I get the idea into them better? How do you take more distance? How is it more difficult to manipulate? Say you, I think it's the same as whatever you tell me that you don't manipulate.
Well, since he says that I'm going to be more aware, and I know that he tells me that he manipulates, well, I'm going to be just as aware.
Oh, I don't know if I manipulate myself. I certainly explain from a point of view, and it's good that it's known. And those who like it like it. Those who don't like it, don't like to let them know that I don't want to cheat on them. I'm not neutral, I have a position. I am not neutral, I have a position now because of that, but I like that you are not either, that you argue with me, but from that discussion we can get things out. The Republicans are calling for liberation, but you can get things out, you can get ideas. Look, teachers, you are there being incoherent, because there you are failing and we have to argue. All right. So first that, I have a position, I am a right-wing libertarian as well known as narco-capitalists.
Maybe a comment about what you love, about the difference between ideology and utopia. And it is that I got to that class a while ago, but in ideologies when we read we saw that a utopia is always like the end of one.
There he is. Yes, it's something like that. Yes, it's fine. As you define, I will talk a little about utopias also what makes utopia. You read utopia to you is communism, not utopias. You did not read Engels that Marxism is a scientific socialism. The others are socialism. Utopian socialisms did not read Bay with Campanella, but Bay with the Atlantis. I mean the new Atlantis or Campanella or the Ababef, people of this style. I'm talking about the utopian oils. Well, the first ideology I'm going to propose is socialism. I don't usually explain genetically. I mean, it's usually explained in a historical key. This is how we started with the first socialists. No, I take an author who is central and I go back and forth. I don't know if I can explain myself. I go back looking for his background, the ideas that influenced him and how he created the system, and I'm going forward on its later influence. When I talk about socialism, I explain Marxism. I study the influences Marx had and the followers he had the most. I try to identify the one who for me is the central figure of the ideology. Okay, Marx is the theorist of moderna socialism for me, although I can many more. Who is Marx? Who knows? Tell me who it was, who went to calm down. He married one.
Well, I had money and the wife did not give me a good family to live in England.
He was not from the Phillips family, the televisions, and this was the one that was his family. No, there were no televisions anymore, but a very rich Jewish family to live in England, and there he ran into him. It was Marx. He was a communist. And so it must be seen, a communist since his younger years. When I was with you, who were in college, you were drunk. He had a jail in college for drunkards. You know, in those days universities had prisons for students. It wasn't like now, yes, we should open a call, because he was imprisoned in the prison for drunks. He didn't pay the rent, he spent all the time not playing, he never went to class. He was from such a family. He was a wealthy family of Jewish converts and later married Jenny von Westphalen. If I remember correctly, she was the sister-in-law of the Prussian Minister of the Interior, who was also a very good family. Well, he never worked in his life, etc. He devoted himself to journalism and wrote several newspapers such as the New Rhenish Gazette and wrote one of the most powerful books in history, which is the Communist Manifesto. It is a book that is pure dynamite. It's from the books. It is a book that has a persuasion, it has a logic. It is written in such a way that it persuades practically anyone, because it is clear, direct, etc. It is a book that even today, I suppose some of you read the Communist Manifesto. Yes, there is a spectre that goes around the world, which is the spectre of communism, and so on. And then everything in the patrician class struggle, against noble privileges, against vassals and folders, against proletarians and everything, all very, very powerful. He has a rhetoric that even today impresses with how powerful it is and that gets many young people into communism because he was a great theorist, so that all his ideas, to me, understand less. Some are almost all wrong, but people stick with the thing. As it is a skinny book, as it is a thin book, as it is a very powerful and very convincing book. People stay with a lot of young people, they stay with that idea and they are like this for life. But the first thing to say is that Marx is a communist. And that's because I say so. Marx, in my opinion, does not always study economics and all other things and become a communist, but he is a communist and builds a philosophical system to support his communism, which is very different. First was the idea, and then came the system. It was not the system that gave the idea, because we think that the philosopher studied all his life and became a communist after a lot of studying. No, he was already a communist when he was young, and what he wanted all his life was to elaborate a theoretical and economic system to justify his communism. But he already had the idea since he was a child, since the university made him a communist. His poems from his youth can already be seen that he is a communist. He has always defended communism. He does not like the society of his time and wants a communist society. He writes a series of very powerful books. He uses the rhetoric of science, that is, his socialism is not utopian, it is scientific, and he establishes a series of books and works and a series of principles that will mark for a century and a half the entire course of future socialism. Even today there are many Marxists, there are many everywhere. You probably have a lot of Marxist friends. Maybe some of you are a Marxist and everything, well, it could be. It's okay. It is a very powerful and very convincing philosophy. I explain what that ideology is based on. The socialist phenomenon. As you are saying, this is not a new phenomenon, nor is it the first socialist one. I guess you will realize that too. No, for example, tell me some pre-Marxist communist or socialist experience.
Messianic socialism. Well, we saw that also in Messianic socialism.
Jesus Christ was a narco-capitalist. Christ was not Christ, he was not a socialist. If you were lied to there, if you don't have Google, search an anarchist. And under it they put the type of narco-capitalist. I think it's not translated, not here, it's coming there, it's not translated, but well, here comes the text, there. Christ and St. Christ and the branch of the capitalist, of course, if you want, read it and explain why he won capitalist. Christ. Explain to us when we get to yes, but tell me old socialist experiences. Socialism is either moderna or it is ancient, very ancient. Socialism is the previous way of life. The old societies were more communist than capitalism. Moderna sinologia derivans de sociedades grandes. Primitive societies are quite communist. Tell me, for example, historical experiences of communism. Do you know any?
That's why it was the farm stuff from. I just don't remember kibbutz.
The gibbets are later, I mean ancient. For example, I don't tell you some. Say, not Socratic. To this say tribe of Israel, not of Israel. I don't think so. Greek polis have good gold calves, not paper money calves. What the Greek polis Sparta can be.
Yeah, I didn't have to go to the cops. In societies, the whole mattered more than the individual.
The Sparta community. The Sparta Republic was a kind of Hellenistic monarchies. Alexandria, for example, Syria, all these things after the fall, as you know of. After the death of Alexander the Great, his empire was fragmented among his generals. Those generals set up protestate states, rather it is called the Hellenistic monarchies. For example, Ptolemy Philadelphus was one of these. All of them made experiments in central planning and made almost socialist experiments and built states that were very regulated, very distributed and with socialist characteristics. These were historical experiments. The Ciencas was very, very communist too. I don't know if they ever explained it. There is a very good book that I recommend to you, which is that of Louis Boden. This is the name of the Roman Empire of the Incas. They must have it up there in the library. The Incas had a central state, they distributed, redistributed wealth, they had common lands, they had a lot of things, not socialism like Moderna. Obviously they didn't know the maximum, but they were socialist experiments. Socialist experiments, for example, it is all the peasant communities, as in Germany, in the Reformation, and in general all the experiments of sects. Well, also King Alfonso X, the sage of Spain or Castile, was a socialist king. He also wanted central planning systems with the means of the time. There is a man named Norman Cohn. He wrote a book called In Pursuit of the Millennium. It explains all the messianic and socialist movements like the Middle Ages. Uzidas, the Lados, Bogomilos, Fraticelli. All the sects that existed at that time of the mythical Tafias, who were also very communist. For example, the mythical King Taffa, who in the times of the Crusades were like messianic movements that existed in the Middle Ages and that made the first socialists. They lived in common, criticized in vice. You who are Republicans, you will know Savonarola. No, Savonarola, they don't know him, they don't get to Machiavelli. They never get to talk about him or that he is trashy, virtuous. Yeah, well, now I was also a preacher, so I wanted to end the viz and live away to you. And he wasn't exactly a socialist, but he was a preacher. This is when Machiavelli warns against unarmed prophets. That is, a prophet has to be armed, otherwise he is going to be a bad prophet because now he has been hanged and burned for being a rebel. But in the times of the Reformation there were great communist experiments. The peasant wars in Germany. If you are as clear as you are, you read Engels, The Peasant Wars in Germany, narrates. He sees them as heroes who made communism in the city of Munster. They put communism for a few years, until the troops came to put respect and ended all that was communistic. I'll explain, but for a few years they established communist republics in those places, because Angel likes them so much. There were socialist experiments throughout history, both at the political level, of the state type, or as well as communes and religious sects. So they preached communism like the Adamites, for example. They didn't want any all-common property. They couldn't be with the same woman twice in a row because they said it was property. They had to rotate, change every woman's day, because if not, I did not know private property, then there could not be. I had to rotate everything, no one from anyone, and we are all from everyone. They were like that, very communist. They say that experiments of this style there were many in history. That is, it is not a new phenomenon, but more. For example, it is the first to give theoretical status of science or pretend to give theoretical status of science to socialism. And he is the central figure of socialism. First we will explain his influences and then what is his program, what theoretical ideas. As I said before, first in theory and Marx bites ideas and then draws up a program. Not so much he, his successors was the Lenin in a book called What to Do, the one who establishes a seal that was called Wuhering. They know him. The only thing that is called the ABC of communism. He was one of the theorists of the Soviet Revolution. He was assassinated by Stalin. Stalin killed, he was the person who killed the most communists in history, and he killed the best, also the brightest. And I say that Marx, in setting out his program, has, for example, the criticism of the program of capitalism. He has a series of books that he tries to establish some kind of. He is very complete, he is an economist, he is a historian, he writes about politics, he has a lot of things, but he explains the program, where his ideas come from, which theorists his ideas come from the most. Let's see. As every ideology itches from three things, it itches first from German philosophy. Mars Heliano, a leftist Gelino, is a disciple of Hegel Feuerbach. So, on the one hand, take his dialectic. As you know, Hegel is a dialectician, and Hegel talks about the dialectics of ideas. The deployment of reason defends the state a lot. The state is the reason for reason on earth. If I'm not mistaken, he said something like this, that he was an absolutely statist author, defender of the state as the sum of rationality, as the sum of ideas and things like that. So, and above all from him the dialectic takes that the advance is of the ideas. For Hegel it is an idealistic dialectic and for Marx a materialistic dialectic, but the concept takes it as difficult. For Marx it is the contradiction between the forces of production that derives, on the other hand. Patricians against purveyors, feudal lords, against vassals or proletarian peasants, against bourgeois. This comes out of those fights, because also the idea that they want it. But the idea that ideas are an epiphenomenon are the result of that material diabetics, that is, every social formation, every economic formation. For him, the important thing is economic relations. He generates his own consciousness. Each structure generates its own superstructure. The watermill generates the feudal society. The steam mill generates capitalist society. If Marx told us in the German ideology, for example, then first he takes from Hegel, itches from great philosophers. It stings what economics is Marxist, what is a classic, is a Ricardian.
Es un clásico, es un ricardiano.
Adam Smith, yes, Mr. Smith, that's my opinion. He is one of the obviously not wanting to, but he is one of the historical fathers of Marxism. Why for criticism? Why Ricariano? Who had particular Ricardo and Smith?
Ricardiano, ¿qué tenía en particular Ricardo y Smith?
Of objective value.
That is the objective value of the work, of how things are going out.
De cómo van saliendo las cosas.
The objectivists call it the radiance. The objectivists say that reality exists at that.
¿Qué? Esa
That's what they said in Atlas.
en Atlas.
And that in chapter so A B is B and CC does not say.
No dice así.
So I do not agree with that doctrine because it is no longer how you interpret it.
Esa, ¿cómo interpretan ustedes?
I mean, I see poverty, I go there, to the street and in the 18th zone.
Yo veo pobreza, voy ahí a la calle y a la zona 18.
And he saw poverty. For example, a Marxist will say, capitalism is lacking, sorry.
Un marxista dirá, falta capitalismo. Perdón,
See how capitalism is such and more socialism and such are needed. I would say what is missing here is capitalism. Who is the one who is sane? The reason depends on subjective. Well, that's not it. Let's see, I explained the photo. We see it as we interpret it. No, I interpret it here. We need more capitalism, free market, more regulation, less taxes and such. There is no need for more social, more regulation, more taxes. But which of the two is right is subjective. I think he's right. Obviously, if not, I would not defend the positions I have. I wish you guys are right or other people are right. I would change my position, not in a moment. If they defend what he defends, it's because I think he's right and none of us can do anything else. Nor do we defend at every moment what we thought, because we are right. So objective value.
Valor objetivo.
That is a concept that is central. So it is Ricardian, because Ricardo defends the idea that things have an objective value and the objective value is based on the amount of work already done. It is another elaborated theoretical concept that adopts it.
Que la adopta.
And from there he draws the central concept of Marx is surplus value and exploitation. Indeed, if things have an objective value and the worker does not collect what he is supposed to objectively collect, there is a surplus value, there is theft and therefore, there is exploitation. This is the central concept of Marxism. The capitalist system is a system in which there is exploitation, there is theft. Obviously all that is false, you will understand. Let's discuss it now, but the concept of Marx is that there is a surplus value. What is the third concept that you get? Where does the third idea come from? Having seen this, that the world is dialectical, that there is an exploitation to see what it is like then, what society we want. How we want to make a society where there is no exploitation in this kind of thing. How will we do without private property and where did we get that anal idea that these are not? The opposite of the French utopians.
De los utópicos franceses.
From the Paris Commune, before the French utopians Saint, Simon, Fourier and Cabot and probably Buonarroti and all the defenders of communism in the French Revolution French there was called this man the conspiracy of equals is a contraphase.
Buonarroti y todos los defensores del comunismo en la Revolución Francesa. O sea, una Revolución Francesa hubo... ¿Cómo se llamaba este hombre? Muy bien. De la conspiración de los iguales. Es un autor francés.
See Mars François.
Ah, Babeuf.
Yes, the one that needs to be studied with you.
Que es el que estudiaron ustedes.
Babeuf and Buonarroti, descendant of the painter. Apparently, the painter's family are the first communists of that time. They tried to make a revolution, the French Revolution. They tried to conspire and stage a communist coup d'etat. Babe was guillotined. He wrote this book, which is The Conjuration of Equals, and there he explains how he was going to carry out that plan. Marx drinks from these projects. Utopia is a very old project. What are the first utopias? The first communist is Plato. Plato is not exactly very utopian about such a society, with its communism of the guardians and things like that. But for example, we have so or all jobs and days. For example, notice that the Greeks and so, the golden fairy, the back, hours onwards. I can't explain myself. Our utopian societies are in the future. Utopian societies in the past were in the past. Then we talked about an ancient golden age that was all degenerating, youth was spoiled and everything was lust. The golden age. We have these things. We have the first utopias, they are the religious ones with two central figures, that almost all of them have a heaven and a hell. Heaven, when described in almost all cultures, is described as an ideal, very happy society. These things are already the first sketches, the first projects of what would be a perfect society. So, each society determines what its heavens are going to be like and in turn determines what a bad society is like with its hells. I recommend the Book of Minas and the History of Hell. For example, there are several good books on the history of heaven, including the Lego one on the history of purgatory. But it is to say that all societies have an eschatology, they have an eschaton, they have a future world and how they describe in the books that future world. For example, Christians have many descriptions of the world. Obviously, no one came back there to tell what it was like, because they describe what that world is like. Some are almost full of rivers, honey and a lot of food and such. Each society usually explains the utopias in the heavens and so what it lacks. If it is a diving city, there is a lot of food. If it is a metropolitan city and if it is a city of another style, then there is a lot of technology. Whatever, society has its utopias, the heavens, all that, the heaven of the Celts, the heaven, a heaven of a drunken people. They were fighting all day, drunk and stuff like that. And after fighting and getting drunk, they would come back to life again and they would come back to fighting and being together again. They were there all day, having fun like that. The Christians depend, the Jews have their own, the Collie and the agenda. Muslims have their paradise like that and don't give up and things like that. So everyone describes social style, but there are literary utopias, some Greek in Hesiod and some more authors there are in the Middle Ages a few. For example, in the myths of the Lucky Islands, the myths of California. The myth of Sanguila, that's where the name California comes from. It was a utopian side of the medievals, but also full of such. There are many, many. The Neverland of Neverland. There were a lot of places like that, full of honey, lakes, whiskey, drinks and so on, all very utopian, plaguing literary utopia. It's a birth. Almost all of them are socialist, that is, the properties in common. Nobody belongs to anyone and everything. Everything is just like that, very abundant, and it's okay. The philosophies of the Renaissance and the classical, you know, the Thomas More, which is a communist society. Also Bacon's New Atlantis. For example, a society of wise men are there, each and every one with their experiments. For example, some defend eugenics, others defend the community of goods, others defend the equality of women, others defend, some are very technological and others are anti-technological. It's a very rich and campanile world. The city of the sun, I guess you know it. These feet, after the 18th century they mythologized Taiting, those Indian islands that they have discovered. They were very idyllic places. There is a lot of literature about this. In the 19th century we have all these French topics, the Icaria of Cabot, the Phamasterios of Fourier, for example, are ideas of societies, all equal, all in common, all eating the same, distributing work so that no one is exploited. And we all have to do everything. I think in the phalanx you couldn't even. They had a kind of shirts that you have to wear, another or tie others from behind so that you learn how good it is in community, that you cannot be alone. That kind of stuff like that. Then everything was designed to live in community, monasteries, there were Icarians and in the United States they made several Sicarias. All these partnerships don't last long. Of course, they have the utopias already. Bellamy, for example, looking back, well, we have this one by Samuel Butler, Butler Wong. For example, There are many utopian societies in the world, each with its own catalysts. Some are very technological, all are machines, everyone does there. Others there is no technology, none. Others are as well as some do not eat meat, or some are very ecological. Each of them expound theories in this way, because in the 20th century a brave new world. Hassily, you know her, you didn't read it. It's a potentially very communist society. It means that we all belong to everyone. He doesn't remember what he was saying there as a digression. Why is it a problem that we are all from everyone, because no one from anyone, that we are all from everyone, not everything, everyone, what I was no longer afraid of. The main source of inequality in self-ownership. I don't know if I can explain myself. All inequalities derive from self-ownership. It is one of the main inequalities. That is to say, that all of us to be the property of ourselves have the possibility of giving or taking away. That is, because a doctor earns silver or a person earns silver. Since he has the possibility to give himself or take himself away, he can tell him, if you want me to talk to you, you have to give him money because all jobs consist of that. If you want to collect a silver, you have to go somewhere at some time, and why do you have to go somewhere at an hour? Because simply because they earn themselves or give them food, they don't go. I don't know why. And all inequalities between human beings, to a large extent almost all inequalities of access. There are people who cannot access us as friends, as boyfriends or whatever, and we cannot access others. I can't explain for whatever reasons. These are sources of inequalities and all derive from self-ownership and a still egalitarian society that everyone earns the same. The inequality of oneself, for example, a society although we all earn the same, everyone, the same house, the same job, and so, maybe Mrs. Asolina was very popular and everyone wants to be her friends, her boyfriends and things like that, and maybe no one wants to walk with me, then get out of here. I was here in a corner that nobody listens to me, nobody loves me, and she's surrounded by people laughing, still earning all the same. There would be an inequality there, yes or no, everyone surrounding her, she having a party and I make a corner going home. I just explain myself without any friend, an inquiry, no one invites me, or anyone. If it is an inequality, to eliminate that inequality, Hassily says, we all belong to everyone, no one can deny anyone to anything. It is not explained to me so that there is no inequality or hierarchies. Although some heavy friends they have, come out with the others from co-uppers, they have to go with the plane. Refuse, I don't know why they have to accept as a boyfriend. I didn't see anyone who asked for it. I don't know why. Well, that's the real equality. Any restriction on that freedom implies starting to create inequalities, as people like me would be told. The envy of society raises, quoting Curvo Neckett, a story. Society is all the same, everyone earns the same car, everything like that, very the same, but there is a revolt. Ugly people get angry, they say, look at the handsome, what advantages they have. Everyone wants to walk with them, and it is so, and with the ugly do not want to walk. No one makes a revolt demanding social justice in such a way that the state and can be equalized. Anything can be equated to that which can only be equated to income. A myth can be equated anything for the handsome we do to him. The state will operate on the handsome, it takes away the beauty by cutting off an ear or nose or making a scar to make it uglier, if they do not paint with advantage, and the ugliest will have cosmetic surgery at the expense of the state to match them. How about that? Equalize too, although he thinks they are equality on some issues. Well, these utopian ideologies of Harling in Brave New World or on the island, for example, the island is already becoming a more moderate utopia. But still it is a eugenic utopia that indicates that women would have to be inseminated or part of them inseminated with semen of Nobel laureates and things like that to have superior quality children. The eugenic utopia's state will bring to semen of Nobel laureates or so that women have children only with higher education. It's an idea to improve the breed. It's called eugenics, the care, that's in Campanella, also Campanella. I remember deciding what good happens in others. We do not breed horses and cows to make them a better breed, and we do not breed dogs and cross them to get a better breed, because we are not going to raise human beings. So he wants to control reproduction, that it is those people who are more capable, more beautiful or healthier who can have children. Then control the playback. They are elements of utopias. There are a lot of them. The behaviorist utopias of Walden, two of Skinner, for example, or of Your Style Already, or The Star of the Unborn of Wehrfeld.
La estrella de los no nacidos, de Werfel.
There are thousands who like it. If you like the theme, I recommend it. Two books, the one by Frank Manuel and Fritz Manuel, The History of Utopian Thought in the Western World, or that of Louis Mumford. The history of utopias is about to begin. If you like the subject, if any topic of this interests you, my education is usually not in a group, it is individual. If any of you are interested in something I say, write to me on Facebook, email or stop me on the street, talk to me and tell me, I want to learn from this and I give you books of that you want. Okay, I'm here quoting just a few. I am interested that these classes is to interest them. I don't want to give doctrine because doctrine is just forgotten about. What I want is, let's say that you like the subject and that when you leave here you go to the library, go to the bookstore or go to the internet where you work and get these books that interest you and read them. That's what I want. I hope you like to encourage them to read these French utopian socialists. It is where he gets more of his third inspiration from the philosophies of these gentlemen. He gets his third source of inspiration from them. So, what does a society without exploitation want? And in order to have a society without exploitation, it builds a utopian world that will be a communist socialist society without private property, in which the state will gradually die out. These are the three sources from which Marx drinks, and what Marx builds: first a theoretical system, then it transforms into an ideology. First, what he does most is criticize the capitalist system. He says that it is an unjust system and then, therefore, derives from there that a socialist society must be built. Marx is much better at criticizing than building. Marx almost never defines what socialist society is going to be like. He only criticizes what is there, and his central criticism is based on the concept of exploitation, that is, that human beings exploit others. I think there is no Buchanan exploitation, which is of the public choice. I'm not me, but is right there. Exploitation is when I don't get paid what I want or when I have to pay what I want. The others are not explained to me. That is, exploitation is when I understand that they pay me very little, and exploitation is when I think they charge me a lot in the store. It's not explained to me. You have to pay me a lot and I have to pay little. That is exploitation, but with all Marx's exploitation, it is based on the theory of surplus value, Well, he doesn't want to criticize it either, because the Marxian system is focused on exploitation. He's taking one of you to von Baberg. The conclusion of the Marxian system. The Marxian system is a very elaborate system, very complex, but it has a few feet of mud. Let's see, imagine that I am an atheist Randian, which is not the case. No. I want to attack religion. I can attack in several ways. I can attack her. Let's see, of course, I don't believe in transubstantiation. I do not believe in the resurrection of the dead. I don't think so. I can't explain myself. No, in the Santa Symmetrina I can attack each of the creeds of a religion. No, I don't think there is a paradise with a lot of security. I can attack one by one, but there is one easier thing, which is I can attack each of the creeds, but I can still attack, for example, transubstantiation, because then it will not be the true Catholic religion, but there may be a Protestant religion, for example, that does not accept that, and so on. It's okay. There is still religion, and I can attack all creeds. Well, what is the easiest thing to attack them all, and how do you attack them all at once, denying what they have in common? Everyone denies God. I'll explain. If I prove that God does not exist, what happens to all religions? They all collapse. I am able to show. I believe in God and well, I think you can prove his existence, but that's another debate. But if I can prove that God does not exist, all religions collapse well. It is the same with Marxism. I can criticize it point by point. There is a point that if I attack it, it collapses. What is the calculation? The economic calculation is not Marxist. The economic calculation is socialist. The economic calculation is given Marxist socialist economies in Fabian socialist economies in Inca socialist economies. In any economy that is socialist is not typical of Marxism. It is typical of socialism. It also occurs, I believe, in empires, and it also occurs in large organizations. A large capitalist organization also cannot work, but we have already discussed this issue. It is not the calculation, which is the central axis of Marxism, objective value and therefore exploitation. That is, if I show that the value of things is subjective and therefore that there is no exploitation. The Martian system collapses because the entire Martian system is built on that. If you notice, he defends the capitalist system. You read the manifesto that says that it is a very productive system, that it coordinates very well, that it collapsed the wall of China, that it is not merchandise, that it is very productive. What Marx criticizes capitalism is not for being efficient or productive, but for being unjust. If we are able to prove that the capitalist system is fair and that the axioms what is going to love are false, Marxism collapses completely. Whether and how one attacks the value of the objective, for example, from subjective. And they have already studied the theory of value. It's my question because you put Adam Smith next to David Ricardo and said that the two had to do with the part of if you remember if you read. Adam Smith says that the value of a deer is like that of beavers because the work of hunting deer as of deer is a thing like that. But for the first time, because the value of things is not determined by work, by demand. Well, it's subjective. The value of things is in your head. It depends on what you value the goods. For me, a skirt, no matter how much it costs to produce it, is worth nothing. I don't want her, I'll explain. You have to work 40 hours to do it, and so on. I can make a cake, or a cake can take 40 hours to do it, and you do it in half an hour. My cake is not worth more than yours for taking 40 hours. That is, that they do not imagine when studying it, I suppose, do not imagine a pearl fisherman. This is studied by something or not. You saw how it was done in ancient times to fish for pearls, for it was a dream. A dream that dived, swam, dived, won the pearl and climbed with it. Then the sea that the pearl said is worth, because it needs a man or a woman, who dive, who play in life. They grab the pearl is worth for the work that the pearl has. What would a subjectivist say, what is worth for the pearl? If what is worth is the work of man, that diver would dive, take the stone that is next to the pearl, take it out and say, it cost me the same work, it would be worth the same. I don't understand what the pearl is worth, and the pearl is the one that gives value to man, not the man who gives value to the pearl. I don't know if I can explain myself.
I have a question. We believe that I say, it took me 3 hours to do this, and here plus 2 hours. But how I have valued it at the time.
I value that drink of yours, and once I value that drink of yours, I value. The employer will assess whether to compensate or not, hire workers or not, and at what price to hire them. Let's see, suppose it looks better the other way around. For example, gold is worth, you will understand that gold happens in the same job. Imagine that in your house there is a vein of gold that goes to its end. So they discover a golden thing, just bend down and take it. Or you have to take out the gold with hard mines, taking out with many mines, with many men, with many things. That's worth different. It's different. The gold you get effortlessly in a river or on your farm, that gold you have taken out of a mine with the work of many Africans to chop it. That the gold of equal height is not worth the same as the work has to see there. Subjective values always does not depend, it does not depend on the work, it depends on the objective relationship of the good, the subjective value of the good. In every time and place fashions change. A straw hat at first is worth a lot of money, then it is worth little, etc. These are things that change and have nothing to do with work. It has to do with the valuation of the goods. But well, suppose it is so, that the value of goods is subjective, is not objective. So there we are already attacking the first point. We imagine like tobacco, we imagine that now the government convinces us and we quit smoking well. What happens to the value of the land? What's wrong with the value of the twisters or tobacco producers? What happens to the value of those who make cigarette rolling machines losers? So what is it that ends the value of the cigar that people want it, and if people want it, we value it backwards. People want to smoke good cigars, so we value the work of the kink. We value the price of the land and we pay it more and it produces tobaccos and or not. So it is the value of the cigar that gives the value to the land, not the land that gives the value to the cigar, I explain. This is counterintuitive, like the whole Austrian economy, but Tomar didn't understand it. I'm going to produce. It is that without work there are no goods. Okay, but I have a maquila and the Marxist tells me, if my work is not good, okay. And since you buy my job at one price and sell it at another, you're exploiting me. I bet it's good. I'm right, but I also can't do the maquila without electricity. Yes or no? I buy electricity at a price and he tells me, electricity. Look, you buy cheap electricity and sell it expensive. You're exploiting me. If my electricity you could not do good. Yes or no? It depends on the value of electricity, it depends on the value of labor, it depends on the value of land. All good, you have to produce it somewhere physical, and those who look at a piece of land and what? And with my piece of land, well, now you get rich that you sell mobile phones, signal and earn a lot of money. I can't explain myself. And if my land you can't do it, you trespassed on me. Sir, I rented you the land at the price you sold it to me. I get the benefit of what I do with that land. You worker, you are sold to me at the price that is on the market. The price you accept me. My profit does not derive from exploiting, it derives from what you do with it. Let me explain, I can hire a laborer. It will be a bad and ruthless pattern by some machine to make gentleman pants. Then the worker comes to me and tells me, boss, what color I make the pants. I can make it black, gray, navy blue or phosphor pink or smurf blue. No, work is not the same. I usually dip the fabric in the color and that's it. I earn the same as a pattern making one to another. There is no elegant gentleman, he can only wear black, gray or navy blue. So elegant gentlemen do not demand a certain type of trousers. They do not demand smurf blue swamps, with rare exception. I don't know how to explain it to me, but the job of doing it is the same and the worker is going to charge me. It will work exactly the same one thing with another. If one wear is the exploitation, there is the benefit that derives from what I command the worker to do, not from the worker who works. If I explain myself, so much work goes on making blue, but you will like black. I bet you do. But the benefit is different, because the benefit derives from my business alert, from deciding what to do with that worker, with that fabric and with that ink of how many pants I make, in what way I make them skinny jeans, I make them with an elephant's foot. I can do them in many different ways, yes or no, from there it derives for my benefit, not from the work of the worker. In addition, there are two more factors that I suppose they would study in the exploitation theory, which is a brutal criticism of Marx. They read it to the theory of exploitation. This is volume 1 of Capital Interest. Let's say I call a worker and I want to plant wine. You can plant the wine to a Tuscany, for example, not to plant a good wine there and the worker to the worker spends 8 hours working. Wine science plant, you can plant it in Finland, for example, or in the Peten. The worker 8 hours, 100 strains of wine is worth the same wine what for whom the same strain, the same worker. All Y is not worth the same.
It looks different.
The wine, of course, not the same strain, it does not give the same wine. The wine of Tuscany is different from the wine of Peden or the wine of Finland. Yes, and it has to do with work. There is the climate, the nature, the land has the value, not the work. And I take that wine and I keep it in a bottle and I keep it in a cellar and I drink it in a year or I drink it in 10. The wine is worth the same. What gives value to wine? Work, time. So, where is the proof of labor value? Where is the exploitation? The exploitation has to be like a table that says how much I should charge and how much I shouldn't. Moreover, theoretically, Marxism is easily refuted. Taking into account all this that I am telling you, you read Marx, I guess not capital. The following is explained to us. The rate of exploitation depends on the organic composition of capital, that is, the ratio between capital and labor is what defines the rate of exploitation. The rate of surplus value, we agree whether or not they are in the capital, as it defines the good. The first thing we know, and they are also in the capital, is that all economic sectors tend to have the same rate of profit. That is known, that is not to say, the insurance sector, the footwear sector, the wine sector, the electricity sector, or the light bulb sector. All the other comedians tend, it's not that they tend to have the same rate of profit. Why, what if this win at 15%, this the 7, the 5? What would happen? What would happen? Everyone wanted to, everyone would stop what they would do, capital would be taken away from here, land and factories would be sold. And that money would go here. No capitalist is going to let others earn more. In addition, there are mechanisms such as stock exchanges, markets, etc. that transfer capital. It is from one sector to another until in the end competition is reduced here. Here the profit rate is increased. It's all the same. It does say more. No economic sector tends to earn more than another economic sector. All economic sectors per unit of invested capital tend to earn the same. Not that they earn the same like that. Gross level is quantity of invested capital tens. The leading sectors gain a little more. The sectors earn a little less. This is the way to divert capital from one place to another, but the trend is the same. We understand that, not discounting the risk and all these things like that. The tendency is to earn the same for the unit of capital invested. It has to be like this. He understands that. No, otherwise no one would invest here. And if you look, it is not richer. A banker with a clothing manufacturer, for example, you come to the list of the richest in the world. Who is there from Rico? Look at the rich, who are bankers, the rich, who own real estate land. One of the richest in the world produces clothes as Ortega is called. Others I can't explain, others produce cars, others produce luxury. Everyone produces their own. In other words, there is no sector more profitable than another sector. We agree, not that not everyone would invest in the most relevant sector. This is balancing well. Let's continue. Other sectors are equally capitalized. I mean, the relationship between capital and labor is the same in all sectors. There are no sectors that are capital intensive. For example, a power plant requires a lot of capital, that is, a lot of machines and a lot of machinery, dams and the like. and relatively little work. Maybe 3, 4 or 5 workers manage a power plant and vice versa. For example, the insurance sector, because it has no capital, but it requires many sellers to sell insurance. Some have a lot of capital and little work. The footwear of each sector has its characteristics and the working capital relations are different. Okay, well, the question I ask is the following: how with different organic capital compositions, that is, with different operating rates, the profit is the same?
Esto es, con tasas de explotación distintas, el beneficio es el mismo.
How with different operating rates, the profit is the same?
El beneficio es el mismo.
Why profit does not depend on exploitation? It depends on what we are saying before. I say that if they want to prove it, it is easily demonstrated that way. Profit does not depend on exploitation, but depends on exploitation. Where is the whole story of Marx? I explain where they are. Injustice, exploitation rate, different profit, the same. There's something fails because supposedly for more, the profit depends on the exploitation. How can it work? What happens? This was put forward by von Babel in an unresolved contradiction that the Marxian system and the only thing called the conclusion of the Marxian system, which is a chapter of that book, explains this. Marco did not know how to answer. Marx did not publish Volume 2 and Volume 3 of Capital in his lifetime, and in fact, the Marxists gave a prize to try to solve this contradiction and none was able. I say that in the beginning, then Marxism as a theory, the theories that you take are false and the premises that are false. But they create an ideological system based on making premises, therefore, a false root. Marxism not only has an economic program, it has a political program, it has a philosophical program that will lead to the derivative program, first in communism and then in social democracy, and then in other forms of socialism such as Fabianism, for example, as Fabian socialism. But basically philosophically Marxism is also a determinism. Marxism is a determinism and here it is a contradiction. For example, I mean, the history of the class struggle. There is a dialectic in history. Let's say it is conditioned, it is not open, but history is the result of dynamics that escape the understanding of the will of men and therefore it is conditioned. The future of socialism is inescapable. Socialism will inevitably come. These are the conclusions of the so-called laws of motion of Marxism. That is, the concentration of capital in fewer and fewer hands, the increasing exploitation of the working class, what is called the pauperization of the working class. All these reserve army doctrines know what that is. No. Supposedly, capitalism always has a reserve army of unemployed to lower the price of labor, iron or bronze laws, wages, etc. That wages always tend to the price of subsistence, etc. But I think, for example, the story is open. Some things, for example, Karl Popper knows him in The Misery of Tourism, he explains it very well. History is open because history is the history of human action and human beings do not know how we are going to act in the future. There is no law that mandates it. We will act as we please and we will act. If now, for example, I make you capitalists, who are thinking about improving, making revolutions or doing all kinds of things, the world will change. I can't explain if I'm the other way around, I don't pay any attention to them and they convince me with you, me. If you continue with the same idea, then no one will happen. But the future is open. There is no historical determinism, but Marx thought that socialism was going to come inevitably. None of the laws of C movement was fulfilled. Neither capital is more and more concentrated, nor the workers are more and more poor. And neither will that macro-mega corporation be created that Marx said that all corporations would be concentrating more and more in the hands of fewer people, until in the end the expropriators will be expropriated and capital will pass into the hands of the working class.
y el capital pasará a manos de la clase obrera.
There is a thing called historical
Hay una cosa que
materialism.
se llama materialismo histórico.
That catches my attention a lot. What does historical materialism consist of, which is the material basis to which consciousness determines?
Que es la base material la que determina la conciencia.
The ideas we have are the ideas at every moment of the ruling class, and each social class has its own ideology. This is the theory of very historical material. Marx and Engels themselves deny this with their own lives. Then I explain to myself how Marx, who is a bourgeois son of bourgeois, husband of bourgeois, can dare to speak on behalf of the working class like Engels, who is a bourgeois son of bourgeois, with an enterprise from which he fed the sea.
Es un burgués, hijo de burgués, con una empresa de la cual alimentaba a Marx.
More was the whole life is fed, according to the exploitation of labor. How that person can dare to speak on behalf of the working class or Vera, you know, when the legend is told that when the political police met, when there was the League of the Righteous, they were one of the movements that Marx mounted in London on behalf of the working class.
La Liga de los Justos, que fue uno de los movimientos que montó Marx en Londres. En nombre de la clase obrera, había
There was a lot, a
un-
kind of political party, a thing like that. The British political police infiltrated a worker.
A un trabajador. A un-
He infiltrated an agent into the meeting, and few quickly discovered him.
Y pocos lo descubrieron rápido.
Why be a worker? Because he was a worker. Supposedly it was a league in defense of workers. The police sent a worker to infiltrate it.
Para infiltrarlo.
They would not discover it at the moment, because none of those who were there were more workers. He never set foot in a factory. There was never a worker other than in photos or things like that. So I say how Lenin, Trotsky, Mao can talk about materialism when they were bourgeois, all of them Trotsky, Mao, son speculators.
Trotsky, Mao, hijos de especuladores.
How can they even talk about it?
Hablar de eso.
With what criteria afterwards? How the content of working class consciousness is determined? How the content of the bourgeois class is determined? Who decides what is the interest of the bourgeois class, the interest of the working class? Who says if the workers have different positions, which one is determined, which one is the worker who determines the interest, and then that the workers are divided into factions and the capitalists into factions? There are landowner capitalists and industrial capitalists. There are financial capitalists, each of them with their own interests, because they are united, and the workers are also fragmented. And to this day you are still going. Worker of the First World, Third World Workers Front, native worker versus immigrant worker, male worker versus female worker. There are many fragmentations of the working class. What is the right one? What is the interest of the working class? Because supposedly the party guides. The Communist Party represents the interest of the working class, and then how it defines a worker. Because you know that the chapter of Capital on classes is unfinished. We like it because it is very incoherent, because how does it define a class more? Let's see how I am. A bourgeois of a proletarian, not by position. One of the months of production. Of course, it's the one who is alone, it's not worth it. The Bishop of Santiago, for example, may earn less than a rich tailor, but who commands more? I don't know, I'll explain. There are other things like status, other things that if not, social classes are complex, and it defines it by the position or not of the means of production. You see, my barber, who has a worker, is a capitalist. Messi is an exploited, according to Marxi. According to Marxi, because notice that it is not the amount of the salary that determines the position or not of the means of production that no months. He is an employee of Barcelona, Madrid is an employee, he is a footballer, he charges. Supposedly the pattern does not explode. He still has to charge more because he is exploited by capital. According to Ma, if Ma, for example, does not understand that there may be, for example, more bureaucrats, he does not understand, for example, that there can be capitalists, workers, owners of his company through shares. There are many things that he does not understand, that there are not in his time. So I say it's a problem. Well, all these philosophies and another concept he uses, which is that of alienation. The worker is frustrated because he does not control the productive process, therefore, he does not own the goods he makes. Do not master pre-production. He only does a part of it and is therefore alienated. It is another concept of the style, aligned with respect to the property, alienated with respect, for example, to the schedule. That is, he does not decide his schedules and has aligned himself with respect, for example, to who his colleagues are at work. I mean, you can't pick the company, you can't pick the schedules, you can't pick him. What he works on, he's a frustrated person. It's such a thing. In the German ideology, he also says that when socialism comes, it will end with elimination. Everything will begin, each one. We will do a little of everything in the morning, we will fish in the afternoon, we will hunt, we will work a little studying, and we will do all kinds of things. A brave new world will end, all without specialists, we will all do everything not to be aligned in the hours. This is a Marxist philosophy in which an ideology called socialism, communism, is concretized as an ideology that is created. The name is later, it is from the Russian Revolution to distinguish the Social Democrats from the total socialists. But the socialist ideology wants to get to socialism. For Marx it is not necessary to arrive at socialism alone, but still Lenin political parties are created, and these do create the Moderna Communist Party, which is a party that they call the Leninist Party, which is a cadre party, a very specialized and very professionalized party. And they want a political program of these theories. Everyone we study here has a political agenda. Which is one? The abolition of the state. Strange as it may seem to them, that is the ultimate goal before the abolition of the state will come.
The abolition of private property.
The abolition of private property, the expropriation of the means of production, and the centralization in the state of production. The evolution of the state bequeathed to socialist society will be future, before it will come to a society called the dictatorship of the proletariat. The working class will take over the companies and govern, and this gave rise to a very powerful political program. I repeat, in the beginning, Marx did not have, let's say, a political program. The political program is done after Lenin and the Russian communists, Puka and Plovsky, all these theorists, and draw up a program. I repeat about how communism works, because at no time does it say how communism is going to work. All this. He also raises the communist effect, raises elements of utopian origin. Property community, housing community. For example, Lengels is a book called The Housing Question. It even raises the question of the women's community. The appearing women will be everyone's, so that there are no rich and poor. In that aspect, people, when it is the Communist Manifesto, does not notice, but the Communist Manifesto includes the women's community, for example, apart from the road community, so that there are no distinctions in the bourgeois. And so that everything for everyone, that there are women for everyone, that there are no rich and poor. Careful, one of the first socialist revolts that there was in the world was from the background of a sultan in Persia, and what they did was to distribute the wealth. It was to divide the women of the harem, that it was unfair that the rich had many women and the poor had none. I say that the women's community is one thing that I say is there too, and at first they took that away. But if they preached free love, then they made a political program that they later applied. The Marxist ideology of that time basically consists in the nationalization of the means of production. The stage of the abolition of socialism never came, and the extinction of the state never came and is over. The Marxist-Leninist program consisted, I repeat, in expropriating the ownership of the means of production and the centralization of it, and creating workers' councils, and distribute, for example, private property. And private property, the objective of pure Marxism is to put an end to private ownership, especially of the means of production, even of some means of consumption, such as housing. For example, housing also becomes property, or land becomes communal property. And it was the state, the rulers, who assigned the use of those lands or assigned the use of those houses and distributed it. The program then served as a model for 60-70 years to all revolutionary movements like the Earth. They called themselves revolutionaries because they wanted to abolish private property and abolish it and concentrate it in the state. Why? Because private property, because state property cannot be dissolved into cooperatives, into other kinds of things, because they have to be centralized, because there has to be a central planning system, because it is another of the programs of communism. Why does there have to be central planning? Because it has to be a government that concentrates and allocates resources and not. For example, there may be socialism of another kind. There may be private socialisms and or not. Let's give an example. Owen still created socialist factories in Nubalana, but he is an example. What experiences do private socialists know? Two condominium is not communist. Your house, yes. Family communism, families is explained. The family communism, what is usually in the houses belongs to everyone or is the first thing that catches it. I'll explain. And in fact, a good part of the conflicts of the houses derive from the fact that the houses are communist and there are conflicts of use. For example, the salon. When people get there they want to watch all the TV. There is a fight over the use of television. They fight over the use, usually the common spaces, the bathrooms and things like that, and then the clothes that women sometimes take off from one sister to the other and things like that. Then it is domestic communism, for example, which occurred, for example, in historical figures such as La Zadruga, which is communism at the family level, that is, large tracts of land cultivated by families, but in a more or less communist way. Communism, for example, is the communism of the convent. The convents of priests or nuns or monks are communist in the sense that it is the private property of the order, but within them there is communism in the common spaces. That is, there are not many forms of communism, because communism has to be centrally planned and it doesn't have to be. It cannot be private communisms, for example, of совхозes, private kojoses, but operating in the regime of internal community, but in the regime of external property. Why? What is wrong there? Because there has to be a central socialism, not private socialisms. I can't explain why we would go back to the same ones. There would be communes that would be rich and communes that would be poor. There would be well-governed, well-managed eyes, which would prosper, and совхозes that would not and would have to be allocated. And then there is a credit allocation problem. Who allocates credit? That is, loans. That is, I want to expand my with host. I want to grow more papayas. My papayas are good. I want to grow more papayas. How I expand production, I need land, I need more men, and I need more. How I have the resources, how I have the credit. At the end of the credit also has to be centrally planned, otherwise there would be inequalities and the state allocates to avoid inequalities resources to each other and is one of the problems. Hence derives what we talked about the other day, the problem of socialism. What we talked about a while ago, a central planning regime cannot work and you opt for either total equality or calculation. That is, if a more or less unequal regime with private ownership of the communes could work, but it would no longer be the same. It would already be uneven. A commune in Switzerland would be richer with a commune in the Congo, for example. Once again we would return to the story that some communes exploit each other, change the scope of exploitation, but not like this. To avoid exploitation, they have to centralize production. Since then, this model has become a model of pure communist ideology. It is the idea that the state has to control all the factories, expropriate the land and then distribute it. It is the model of Russian communism. In the beginning it was communism plus communism. It was war communism. At first, from the 18th to the 20th year pure communism operates. Everything was nationalized and it was the biggest production drop. I think that since there has been written history, there has never been such a big drop in production as when the Russians installed communism. 2 years later, Bahari himself changed the established system, the new economic policy, and then Stalin rationalized again, but never before reaching total communism. Total communism was an absolute case, so we were. I suppose you will know about other subjects, the problem of economic calculation, the problem of the allocation of goods that you cannot calculate, not assigning goods to him correctly. Then planning fails became model, a model. In fact, communist parties emerged all over the world, inspired by the Soviet model. Then they created communist parties in Eastern Europe, throughout Asia, and then throughout Eastern Latin America and Western Europe. All the countries of the world had their communist party, and all with a program quite similar to the original socialist program, and succeeded in quite a few areas when it came to taking political and economic power. It was a failure that is everywhere today. I think that's left in Cuba, North Korea. I don't know if Nepal, and then there is the grace. Many countries ruled by communist parties, but which are the most capitalist countries on earth? I'm thinking, for example, the most capitalist country on earth. Every index says it. It is ruled by the Communist Party. Why they don't know which is Hong Kong? All the statistics say that it is the most capitalist country on earth, the most free market, the wildest, with all the rules of capitalism. There it is ruled by the Communist Party of China today, and the country that most wants capitalism on earth is Vietnam, also ruled by another communist party, but they are communist parties in name and capitalist in practice. That is, the old communist parties only rule in Cuba, North Korea, and somewhere else. There are variants of the main Marxism and Maoism. There are the Trotskyists, who are also Marxists. They are all Marxist communists. These three Trotskyists are basically similar to. The main difference is that Stalin's Marxism-Leninism is nationalist and Trotsky's is internationalist. Trotsky's talks about a permanent revolution. It always has to be always changing the bureaucracy so that it does not get bogged down and take power. And the other, let's say it's more, was bureaucratized and transformed into a thing. But this was the socialist movement worldwide, probably as an ideology, one of the most influential in recent years. As a pure ideology, it has all the elements of an ideology, theory, system, creates movements, creates unions, and in many minds it still survives. I think you all know that communist friends who want a model of this style to yes and still continues despite the failures. And just as it is a very powerful ideology, it continues to occupy the minds of many people, and many people continue to see the world in these keys. Exploiters, exploited, suppressed, rich, poor, and so on, with international anti-colonial programs and things like that. Capitalism, the first world, capitalism, the third development in Latin America had a lot of influence on Cuba and on the communist and guerrilla movements that these in the 80s there were all over the world. In Palestine, too, the PLO had Marxist influence, although it was not communist. But there was a movement of this style on a large scale, and central planning had a great influence not only in communist countries, but in countries, for example, post-colonial. I'm thinking of Egypt, the Egypt of Nasser. I'm thinking about Syria. I am thinking of other countries that adopted communist-like models without reaching the total nationalization of the months of production as a socialist ideology. The maximum was one of the most powerful. It generates a lot of disputes, academic debates, etc., but it was transformed into practice. That is, it was a movement based on an idea at the time considered crazy or an idea considered absurd. He managed to infiltrate the minds of many people and transform himself into a program of action. All of them, and such a program of action was carried out for a long time in many countries of the earth. Many countries of the earth carried out this program carried out. I think a lot of the success is due to an Italian. Who knows? Tell me who Gramsci. Why? Who knows the old man, the old Grams?
al viejo Gramsci.
I don't want to talk about him today, none.
Ninguno.
He is the founder of the Communist Party and the Communist Strategy.
Y de la estrategia comunista.
But it is not for Central Europe, which still survive. For example, in Italy, in Spain, in European countries, the Gramsci strategy still survives. What is this strategy? He wrote a play. He was imprisoned by Mussolini. He wrote a unique work from which they took out several books and writings that are called the letters from the prison Lettre de la Q-Encina Gramsci, qui en numbers vale para las
¿Qué
ideologies.
enseña Gramsci? ¿Qué nos vale para las ideologías?
Gramsci said, we must not make the revolution, we must not fight with weapons.
Con las armas.
Socialism will come when there are socialists. If people are socialist, they will come to socialism. And what we have to do is get people to ask for socialism. And how do we get them to ask for socialism? By educating them in socialism. The strategy is to control the means of education and the media. It's about the people, I repeat. It's not that they make the revolution. It's about people being socialist, and they achieve that in a good part of the world. To this day, people thinking that they are not socialist and in fact asking for socialist things. He asks for public education, he asks for public pensions, he wants the state to control the banks, he wants the state to control the money, he asks that he controls everything, and because he asks because people are socialist and socialist, because they are educated in socialism without realizing it, because what we understand today by common sense or by the normal, or what is serious, what is responsible is to be a socialist. And most of the policies carried out by the supposedly normal governments of the world are socialist. Money today is socialist or capitalist. The monopoly has a central bank, and the central bank operates. As Professor Walter de Soto says, the central bank operates in the same way with a cement factory in the Soviet Union. He is the monopolist of good. It determines the quantity of the good, the price of the good, and the quality of the good. I explain myself and above all, determine what money is. That is, the European Central Bank, the Bank of Guatemala, or the Bank of Mexico. Each of them determines the amount of money there has to be, the price it has to have, and the quality of it. It is a central planning system. That wasn't the case before. It seems normal to everyone that money is capable of being created, as formerly each bank created its money, or money formerly that was private. Money before, as you know, was now gold and silver. Absolutely private money is not a state-backed money. It is a private money of exchange of a commodity such as gold and silver. To this day, not the money was statalized, but the money was statalized. Education, it was statalized. Health, it was statalized. The means of locomotion of transport are nationalized or semi-nationalized. In much of the world, many countries have a monopoly on roads, a monopoly on railways, a monopoly even on airlines. That is, in many countries, monopolies. And it's okay. And that's what is considered normal. Why is it considered normal? Because ideology triumphed. And now we see the world with socialist eyes. Everyone, including me. We see the world with socialist eyes because we were brought up in a socialist environment, and what surrounds us, common sense, or the world around it, is socialist. So it's Gramsci's triumph. There we see how an ideology triumphs. The ideology had deviations.
Una ideología. La ideología tuvo desviaciones.
In what sense that socialism is not the only one there is, it is not the Marxist one. There were deviations, and one day more than Marxists are socialism, it has a phototype of socialism. What is social democracy? In all its variants, social democracy is Marxist in principle. Social democracy in principle is communist, and is as communist as the orthodox communist parties. What makes the difference is the strategy. That is, for the social democrat, he first realizes that what Marx said is not being fulfilled. That is, the worker is getting richer and richer. Companies are becoming more abundant and less concentrated. All the predictions that he said about pauperization, that the world is going to be poorer, all fail. In the world it is getting richer, it lives better, and capitalism less concentrated and freer. So they change the strategy first. They realize that this is not working, and they realize that the workers, for example, in Western Europe, especially in Germany, are not going to want to vote for a Marxist party because they are getting better. They are not that bad either. So what they want to do is a political program to achieve socialism by democratic means. Bernstein, for example, Bernstein was very Marxist. Bernstein was one of those who carried, if I remember correctly, Engels' coffin. When he died, he was one of those who carried him on the shoulder. He was a very close person to them. Then, let's say he went to Germany. I think the Kaiser bought him, bribed him, and set up a tailor-made socialist party for him, a socialist party like that, very communist but democratic. And then Bernstein got into the system, and it was very difficult that later he left and ended up ruling with Merkel. The Social Democrats are comparing themselves to the Merkel, to Angela Merkel in Germany, that is, as withered as they were. There you have them ruling with the right, that is, in just over 100 years. Or Kautsky, also known as the renegade Kautsky, for renouncing revolutionary Marxism and accepting a gradualist Marxism. Well, there is also another current that is not Marxist, because there are non-Marxist socialisms that were not very successful. It's the Fabians. They know them. Fabian socialism is British socialism. British socialism is socialist, but it was not Marxist. It is the socialism of the trade unions, of the Labour Party unions. They are socialists who indicate socialism, but their methods are not Marxist, that is, they are not revolutionary, nor do they share all the visions of Marxism, that is, the whole idea of class struggle and things like that, but they want to reach socialism by democratic means. He is based on Fabius Cantor, who defeated Hannibal not with one battle, but with many battles. I don't know why. Hannibal was not defeated in a great battle. He was defeated by small battles that were wearing him down until he could no longer and collapsed. And fifth, Fabio Cantor was the one who made that strategy. So the Fabians want to do the same thing as defeating capitalism, not with one battle, but with other little battles, domesticating it. Well, we started first with the labor struggle, because we started with the control of the nationalization of some economic sectors, the nationalization of the railroad, and we began little by little to defeat capitalism in small battles, not with a big one. So the strategy is different. And then, for example, there are Veblen-type socialists who did not give rise to any ideology. Bellin was very anti-capitalist, and he was a socialist, but rather technocratic. Well, I didn't say anything about him. They do not know that the old priest in Balaam No. 1 was a very curious man who lived at the end of the 19th and beginning of the XX century. An American professor at many universities was kicked out of many universities for being lazy, for hanging out with students, for hanging out with professors, for doing so. Very bad, but he was a guy who wrote very badly, talked very boring, but he was a pretty brilliant guy. He wrote a famous book. He says that one of the best essays of the 20th century is about the idle class. If anyone knows him, surely the comrade does not like him, but not because of what he says, because he is like that, very anti-capitalist. And so it is a speech saying that the bourgeois class, which is like a rentier, parasitic and idle class, which does nothing and spends all day on spending. Create conspicuous consumption. He seems to know it well. No one knows what conspicuous consumption is. I'm going to talk about the goods of Bethlehem. Conspicuous consumption is consumption that is used to appear status, that is, it is not consumption to enjoy the good, but to boast of the good. So, branded goods are the goods that are used to receive status for branded clothes, branded cars. The consumption of certain alcohols, liquors or foods to show off, etc., the use of certain perfumes. Certain things are the goods of Bethlehem. They are conspicuous consumer goods that or connoisseur goods means when you take out a cigar and smell there are a couple of reserve. When they are bragging that they know about it, it is a consumer good, it is a good to brag or it is a waste bianc, he told me. He said, the ancient Indians had a custom called the potlatch. They didn't study it. He doesn't know what it is. I like the other problems a lot, and that was that habit. There was a day when they got together, the exchange. Yes, but one day they used to get together in Pablo. It was an exchange, but then there was a day when everyone got together and had a party. Then the Indians all went there and made a bonfire and burned things. They burned useful and valuable things. Tents. Well, what they used, not tools. All good. And to the other towns that attracted attention because the one who burned the most was the one who commanded the most afterwards, but the one who wasted the most. That is, I burned 4 blankets and 2 tents. I explain useful things and that I burned the most. It fills everything, and it is striking that the one who splurged the most was the one who commanded the most. Everyone did more cases later, until the other Western peoples found out that in Europe exactly the same thing also one day, and in the Western world at a wedding or on New Year's Day. Of those who burn more that day than buy a dress that is never worth more. It is not explained to me that they use more expensive perfumes because the end of the year, at least before, it was okay not to repeat the dress ever. I don't know how to explain yes or no at weddings or like that. The more we burn that day, the more alcohol, the more expensive, the more liquor, perfume, the more expensive, hairstyle is more expensive, which are only worth for a few hours. Also, I explain myself, clothes and shoes that are only worth. It would happen who burns the most and spends the most would be the one in charge the most, just like the Indians. Yes or no is conspicuous consumption. So, Veblen criticizes capitalism by saying that it is a conspicuous consumption system, explaining all the customs of capitalism. For example, capitalism. A car, the more useless it is, the more it is valued. Everyone understands that, no? Which car is more useful, a station wagon or a Porsche? Which van is much more useful? It fits more people, it fits more cargo of everything, which we value the most useless car. That is precisely why it is a 2-seater car. It is a car that has almost no trunk. I don't know if it is or not, that's why it is valued. I don't know if I can explain myself. It is useless because it is pure exhibition for pure exhibition, but not for utility. So capitalism values things, the more useless they are the better. So he does as a satire of capitalism and defends an economic system based on technique. In The Engineer he has a book called The Engineer. It's a pricing system. He wants a system, a kind of non-capitalist, socialist economy, but not governed by workers, governed by engineers, governed by expert and wise people and who direct production. Well, I say that would be a Marxist one, because they don't want the workers, they want engineers and capable people like that running the country. So we have of this style the one that triumphs basically is the one above. Although the Fabians had influence, Bethlehem had almost no influence at all. Although Belen as a theorist, he is probably the most elaborate non-Marxist theoretical socialist of all. The first ones, they elaborated a social democratic political program that gradually eliminated the class struggle. What they wanted in the first place, for example, were watering down. At first they only wanted control of the means of production of large enterprises. They wanted to nationalize and they succeeded. They nationalized the power plants, they nationalized the mines, they nationalized the gas and the transports. But let's say consumer enterprises or small craft enterprises or enterprises left them and wanted to control, for example, through trade unions, labor bargaining, fixing prices, wages and benefits. Even as Social Democrats, they wanted the profits to be distributed with workers' funds in the way that workers' funds gradually controlled the enterprises. It was about concepts like co-management and we're not talking about it. Sometimes he also writes everything together without a script, which is the co-management of employers and workers, or encouraging mixed formulas such as cooperativism in Europe and co-management in Eastern Europe and in Sweden. In Sweden it did not take to curdle, but the idea was raised that the companies be managed by workers, that the workers be through funds, the owners of the companies, and that the workers participate in the... They make business decisions to invest, that put things like that on them. In Western Europe, cooperativism is defended, the idea of socialist factories that are internally socialist, that is, owned by all the workers, but capitalist in their operation. That cooperative companies cooperate, compete against each other, and cooperate in an entrepreneurial way. So they were slowly creating a thing called the welfare state. In principle, their claims were economic. It was based, I repeat, on demanding better wages, ownership of large means of production, of large factories, whatever they may be. And then, little by little, they began to claim, especially after the Second World War, claiming the welfare state. The welfare state has a very large social democratic root. It has a socialist root. Let's see, at first the ideas of the welfare state. The Marxists considered themselves reformists, petty bourgeois, and so on. Little by little later, they even ended up adapting to the welfare state model. But the state model is created, which is also a triumph of social democratic ideology. It is an evolution of Marxism. The Social Democrats are slowly abandoning Marxism. In particular, there is a milestone that is the 59th year. It is the Bach-Godesberg Congress in Germany. At this Congress, the Germans abandoned Marxism and began to demand reformism, that is, they began to defend capitalism. But a strongly corrected capitalism, the so-called welfare state. All well-being is another of the... Although Marxism was one of the derivations of socialism, the other is the welfare state, which also depends on the place. This one really succeeded. He succeeded and continues to succeed. The social democratic idea of a series of leaving the market more or less functional in some areas and regulating or nationalizing part of the economic activities of the country. Today it has succeeded a lot because in Western economies more or less half of the economy are the states. Already this social democracy departs from Marxism. Above all, the welfare state begins. It is basically created by British Labour. They also have their philosophers and praxis. T.H. Marshall. Or Biebrich sent him the Foreverich. Above all, these philosophers who I am pointing out introduce two great theoretical concepts, especially one ambiguous concept such as social justice, which is a concept that already comes from the 19th century, but they introduce a new one.
Conceptos ambiguos como justicia social, que es un concepto que viene ya del siglo XIX, pero ellos introducen uno nuevo.
Citizenship rights is a radically new thing.
Es una cosa radicalmente nueva.
Let's see, the new one was not present. For example, they were socialists or Tom Paine. The rights of man are. Some socialists such as Louis Blanc, 19th century, introduce concepts of Daniel. They introduce the concept that of social justice they introduce it, which is a concept that I suppose you studied it. You didn't read Hayek. The Mirage of Social Justice in the volume of Law and Legislation and Freedom, which is a book by Hayek. It has 3 volumes, Norms and Order. The Mirage of Social Justice and the Political Order of Free Society. In Volume 2 Social Justice there are several chapters explaining social justice and criticizing the concept of social justice. They are ideas of egalitarian court, ideas of social justice, and ideas of citizenship. They are philosophies, they are words, they are things that occur to gentlemen in the head and then end up being concretized into things. But I do explain myself. These are the ideologies. A gentleman like that means, so he thinks stupid things like that, but he comes up with things like that from the back. There are people who pay attention to it and end up in a program, and people pay attention to it many times because it is functional to some sector. It is also functional to other characters. These are ideas. For example, what is social justice? What is equal opportunities? What is a concept that is used a lot to justify? For example, how is it justified that the state provides education? How well is the distribution of wealth justified? They are egalitarian concepts that income is like a table according to which wealth has to be distributed. Equality is a mathematical concept, it is not a social science concept. These are the great mistakes of the social sciences. It is to incorporate concepts from the physical and natural sciences into the field of politics and economics. That's a big mistake. There is no equality, but these philosophies pretend that there has to be a justice. What he explains to Thomas Sowell when he talks about cosmic justice does not serve to talk about it. You heard it in the book The Quest for Comics Justice Post-Cosmic Justice. The world is neither fair nor unjust if it is something deliberate. If I steal your laptop from any of you using force or a gun, that is a deliberately unfair act. It's a bad act. Now if you are born on YouTube students, unfortunately, with less severe values. I was blind students, I had students who had to use a wheelchair, they are sick, and I even had students who unfortunately died at the age of 18, 19, of a heart attack or a disease they had. That's fair, unfair. It is right that there are healthy people and sick people. No, it's not unfair. That's how they came out. It's a disgrace, but it's nobody's fault. No one wanted this man to be born that way. If some people are smarter than others, that's fair and unfair. If some people are more beautiful than others, for example, it's fair and unfair, it's the way it is. And if some people are nicer than others, stronger than others, it's as if the human being is stronger than you. I am one of these boxers who earn many millions of dollars. My strength is my income. A model earns money for the pretty face or not. A movie actor earns money for the pretty face. That is just unfair, and it is just unfair that you are smart and others are not so smart. I don't know if I explain myself, he explains it very well. For example, I recommend for these purposes 2 books, for example, Preparing This Kind of Thing. Nancy Atkoff's The Survival of the Handsomest analyzes all the advantages a person has for being beautiful and all the problems he has for being ugly.
Analiza todas las ventajas que tiene una persona por ser guapa y todos los problemas que tiene por ser fea.
And I detail them all there. And he realizes that there can be huge injustices. No, life is not the same, it is not. I'll explain. Another one I recommend is the one by Catherine Akim, Erotic Capital, that goes more or less of the same. That is, the capital that people get in income, money, friendships, influence can be attractive or not. The problems the ugly have, the advantages the handsome enjoy. That's fair, unfair. Be careful when we talk about distribution and redistribution. Intelligence, beauty, health, character are inherited, yes or no, that is, they deserve them. You deserve to be beautiful or ugly. They deserve to be smart or not. They deserve to be healthy, so sick they deserve it. Is it a merit of theirs or is it a luck that touched them when we redistributed, because we redistributed only one thing? Social justice, which refers to redistributing everything. We redistribute you only to what suits us. I don't know if I can explain myself. When we talk about redistributing, we are only talking about redistributing income or money, that is, trying to get money. But intelligence, for example, is equalized or enhanced. In other words, intelligence. What is enhanced by equality or inequality? What is enhanced by intelligence, equality or inequality? Inequality. If you are smart already as a child, better school, better college, better university, better graduate scholarships, better opportunities to earn money. If you are born, maybe you are not very smart as a child, you are not very smart as a child. What's wrong with him? It doesn't even happen in primary anymore. I explain the inequality there. To the one who is smart, I only strengthen it more. They even give him more things, and to those who are not ready, he crushes it more because we distribute it to ourselves. Let's do the other way around. The most donkey, which is the best university in the world, we send him there. I'll explain. And when the best college is over, or we do it more to the smartest. Which the worst school falls in the worst neighborhood here in Guatemala City, not there for the smartest, is not explained to me. It will be bad if we don't put the most donkey on something by sending it there, and the smartest one we don't lower it a little by sending it there itself or not. For already, we can forbid him to read, we can forbid him to have books, we can forbid him to study, and instead, give the other the best books. The best thing is school. Yes or no, it seems absurd to them because the rent does not seem absurd to them. It is just as absurd in one case as in the other. But what is the difference that income or merit? Income is by merit, by many factors, that is, your income is supported by you, probably by undeserved things, maybe by the inheritance of your parents. Well, because of your intellectual abilities, well, because of your health, because of your skills with painting, with art, with politics, with whatever, with your skills, rhetoric that you speak very well, etc. It can be with its beauty, it can be with 1,000 other factors. All of them are deserved, and that's what gives you income. Then I explain myself. But be careful where the trick is. There are few truffles here, these people, all of them. What is it that the intellectual has? What is it that the cultured, as we call it there in Spain, what culture? What is it that the intellectual of the left or the intellectual knows how to do? So it is what he knows how to write, and surely he is very clever in an abstract way. What is it that he does not know how to do? Win the silver. I explain myself, and he gets angry that being as smart as he is, and he knows so much philosophy and so much political theory, so much that a butcher, a pork seller who earns more money than him, then that makes him angry. So what does he want? He wants a world that is ordered by criteria of intellectuals. I'll explain. Then in the world he designs, the wise would rule, the technicians would rule, the planners would rule. What is it that he is? I'll explain. I want a world where he is the one who rules. I'll explain. Therefore, he criticizes or defends the equality of incomes, but the inequality in the intelligences. I don't know what he often has, but what is his advantage? That he is the one who writes, he is the one who educates, he is the one who speaks on the televisions and on the radios, he is the one who has the ability to influence people's minds. That's why their programs succeed. That is why ideas of social justice or equality triumph for more that is fair or unfair. I repeat, how there can be equal opportunities, there may never be. There can be equal opportunities for many factors. It's just that I make myself. I like young people like they are. They have those laptops and these things all, and I didn't have them. And look how well they have a good time. They can learn, and I didn't have those things. And what am I going to do to them? I was born years before you. I don't have those modernities that you have. Look that they live, they can travel. And before traveling it cost a lot of money. And now you are all going to Europe, you are going everywhere. And we didn't even dream about this and all these things. And he will tell me that you are to blame. We have other advantages, because there was less labor competition. There was another series of things, that is, the past is not explained to me. We have advantages of another style, but we can't be complaining. We can't complain either. We don't have the same opportunities in one place as in another, and opportunities are not opportunities, opportunities for something. I don't know if I can explain myself. For example, imagine that one of you has a voice to sing Chinese opera. For example, you have that voice. If she has heard of opera or Chinese mule opera is an example. Imagine that you have that characteristic in Guatemala City. It is unlikely that you will discover it. I don't know why. Just like many abilities that you have many abilities, only many of you are going to die without knowing that you have them, simply because maybe you never sang opera China. They never piloted a tractor or a reactor, and maybe they were great war aces. But in the place where they were born in which they lived, maybe they'll never try that. Formula 1 drivers or Go players are not explained to me as far as I know. Go is not played. Then maybe they were geniuses of Go and they could also make fortunes playing Go, but they will never know if they are good at playing Go, or singing Chinese opera, or many other things, simply by being born where they were born. If you make a place, for example, that has a ballet school for whatever school, and you see that they are for ballet. They can be great danzarinas if they are born having those same gifts in a place where there are no ballet schools. They simply take advantage of them and reach an age that no longer exists. You can no longer form the legs to be dancers or form the voice. The Chinese opera must be welcomed at the age of 8, and the 8-year-old is not taught it after he will never know. So maybe you are great singers, you can't take advantage of everything. That's more, they will never know. Then it is just that, because it is as it is to be done, where they are born. When they are born with the family they have some opportunities or they have others. But this is radically unmatched and they cannot match opportunities. They can only equalize and think about what suits the planner, that they equalize that something like that is not equal either. So our opportunities are indeterminate by our context, totally, by how you are, by the friends you have, by where you are born when you are born, and so on. There are many factors that cannot be equated, which even say the public good, the school of the school, or that the whole state lends the school to it. School is never the same. Let me explain the Mexican state. You Mexicans, if I remember correctly, do not have many schools. They are the same, some schools, for example, in Mexico than in Acapulco. What not exactly the same? Yes, the school is the same. They probably don't have the same means, but they don't have the same teachers, nor do they have the same students. And that already determines a lot of things. A good part of the income one told you also depends on who you are with, the relationships. One of the most important factors to explain success failure is who you hang out with, who are your friends or who are your partners. It is the most important decision they make in their life, and a style decision may well ruin them, it may well make them very rich. It depends who you hang out with, what friends you have. If you have friends who pull you up, who make you be workers, who encourage you, you will do well. If your friends get you into vice, they get you into drugs, they get a lot of things that there are also friends who are like that, then it will be bad for you. But those are decisions that you and your husband make, your boyfriends, your girlfriends, all that kind of stuff influences. It's not the most important thing for them to do in their life, this kind of thing. But those things are unmatched, they can't be matched. There is no equalization factor, because they are the things that decide in the world. But that philosophy triumphs, the philosophy of equality triumphs, and the philosophy of social rights triumphs. They know the distinction between positive and negative rights. Positive rights, you have the right to do something, and the negative is that you are negative rights is that they do not do things to me, and for me they are the only rights. That is, that they do not beat me, that they do not assault me, that they do not rape me, that they do not rob me, that they do not hurt me, that they let me move. I mean, don't let them stop me from things. It's the negative right, don't mess with me. Positive rights, the right I have to have something. I don't know if I can explain myself. That starts with the constitutions of the 1848. I repeat, as before, Tom Paine spoke the rights of man, and other authors what it consists of. They start talking about the right, for example, to work. They start talking about the right to housing. They start talking about the right to health. They start talking about the right to education, which are not negative rights, they are positive rights. Why? Because it implies that if I am not able to provide that service or obtain that service, the state, or what they call it, society, has to pay it to me. I have a right supposedly to be free. I have the right to have things, because supposedly freedom is based on having a series of things. I can't be free if I don't have food, I can't be free. If I don't have a house, I can't be free if I have an education. It is the dialectic of positive law, in fact, negative. Well, Titmuss and Marshall devised positive law and established the right of citizenship. This is due to the fact of being an English, German, Italian citizen. I have a number of rights that society owed me. Society has to feed me, it has to clothe me, it has to give me education, healthcare, and many other things that are now fourth and fifth generation rights. Happiness, the right to a lot more things, to a clean environment. There are a lot of positive things. I say, there may be a positive right. Yes, if there is, tell me one.
Public education.
Yes, that's how it's sold. I wonder why there can't be a positive right to education. That is that other people, if I want to learn something, have to pay me for education. No, it's not that we say education has to be given to me, it has to be given to other people who don't have to pay for it, like education. To see all the freedom. I understand freedom as something material. I am what is called a liberist, that is, a liberal only economically. That is, I have the idea that all freedoms derive from economic freedoms, not from political freedoms. I don't know if I can explain myself. Freedom always has a material basis. Let's see, freedom of speech or thought. They all have it in their heads. They think what they want and no one can take that away from them, not even in tortured. Think what you want to, you have the right in your head to think what you want. What may restrict you is the right to express your opinion. Because to express his opinion, what requires material means to express his theories. You require a television, a radio station requires paper and ink in the case of a newspaper, or requires a laptop or a tablet to write Facebook or WhatsApp or whatever you need. But they always need something material. If the state eliminates these freedoms and eliminates private property, it can eliminate things, and all freedom derives from private property. In what sense? What was happening in Chile, for example, the government in the type of Allende, or what is happening with Cristina in Argentina or in Venezuela with other places? What do? Censor? No, they do not censor. Opposition newspapers are simply denied paper and ink. They say that paper and ink, the currency to import paper, as they are not needed for other things, and deny them access to paper and ink. But they do not prohibit anything. They are banning. No, in fact, yes, they are not censoring by law, they are censoring simply by material means. Allende censored, prohibited the import of spare parts to the radio and only gave spare parts to his radios, not ours. The radios ended up breaking down and not working. You are free to the extent that in your homes you can gather there and write conspire. You are free to the extent that you can buy a photocopier or a machine, edit your stuff, or you have a PDF cost and a computer and write your stuff and post it on the internet. If you do not have access to your material means, you have nothing, you have no freedom whatsoever. That is a real freedom, but I have the right. I repeat, to positive goods, to education. For example, education is a good we call universal. Education in itself is a good thing. What do they say? What do you say? I would tell you. It depends on what I learn. There is education that can be good if it is already good. Capitalism or making money and producing is an education. For me, an example could be good education that is neutral, which is a consumer good. I'm going to read Rumi's poetry. I'm going to read Persian poets or Chinese poets as a menu. I love Chinese stories, an exquisite thing. I'm going to read a poetry book. He is a very exquisite poet, old Dante. Things like that, not very high and cultured. And such cult poets. Rimbaud, Baudelaire, Berlin. Things like that. We have Papini and things like that to Montal of Cuttlefish Bone. It is an exquisite poem of the best of the XXX century. Similar. Look how clever they are that Persian poets are bequeathed, and so a very high thing. Theatres and the Baroque. That kind of education is a consumer good, that is, it is a good that you enjoy, which if you are very high and recite poems and talk about very high things. But it does not make cement, as I say, it will not seem cement so much culture. It is not explained to me either to make concrete, or to make concrete, or to make iron. I don't know why. It is very exquisite, but there is no dough coming out, no cement coming out. I'll explain. It is a consumer good, like tasting a delicious liquor or smoking a cigar. It is a good that you enjoy. They are lofty and speak of high culture, but I repeat that, it doesn't make cement, it's not good for making cement or for feeding chickens. If I explain myself, that's fine, I'm not against it. So there is a productive education that teaches you how to make consumer cement. And there may be unproductive education, yes or no. That is, if I teach them bad ideas, then we are going to teach today how to kill people and such today kind of poison theory. I explain myself and explain to them all kinds of racism. Here today we are going to study Bash, of which he is a racist theorist, the Count of Gobineau, Carus or Chamberlain, who are the theorists of racism. Let's look at the Aryan race, the race such brachycephalic dolichocephalic Gauls. We started studying all the theories of races, and race is superior to the other, and we explained all those things like this, or poisons, or killing, or how to beat a person on the street. Whether yes or no can be taught, and with erudition. I can cite here 1,000 sources of bibliography and studies in the literature. The more he taught her about it is good, it is bad. That is, education can be counterproductive if I teach wrong economic doctrines to determine what they are. But if an economic doctrine is wrong, you apply it, you do harm or you do good. The more they learn from that, careful. Many times our colleagues or friends from the hard sciences think that we are not important and that what we do is worthless. That's false. Our ability to destabilize the world is far superior, and the ability to do good or do evil is far superior to yours. I mean, there was a Mr. or a Mrs. who was taught by Maximo Fidel Castro. Someone explained it to him or told him about it for the first time, or someone gave a Marxist book or a newspaper to someone taught Fidel Castro Marxism, whether or not when he was young, when he was someone taught him. That person did right or did wrong, a lot of wrong. And it's the power of ideas. It's the power of sciences like ours. An internal politician who would read, as we are talking about before, how it was at Audi. Someone taught that gentleman when he was young about capitalism and free trade, and it did Italy a lot of good, because Italy's economic development was one of the greatest of its time. Much bigger than German in the 50s, because someone taught it to him. Those theories, that is, ideas, are important. Well, I say that education in itself is not a good. The first thing that needs to be desegregated is education, not health or anything. It must be determined, desegregated, and see what is good, what is bad, what is indifferent. Now for some things, a person can be good for others, bad for some. It can be a consumer good. It is subjective, it is not subjective, but subjectively not all education is equally good. But the question I ask is, do I have the right to have a friend? I have the right to have a girlfriend, but I have the right. That's why I'm asking the same with education. Why don't I have the right to have a girlfriend or a friend? It implies that if I get a girlfriend by my means is that I will force one on the street to come with me as a girlfriend, yes or no. And if no one wants to accompany me to the cinema or to football, he grabs any one of you and forces him to come with me so that I'm not alone. That's what it would mean to have a right. I don't know if I explain to myself that you have to force other people to do the thing if I don't get it. See, when I say I want education, I want health or housing, what does this mean? That if I am not able to get a house by myself, what needs to be done? Forcing other people to work a few hours to pay for a house for me, yes or no, and working a few hours is not the same slavery as forcing me to be with a person, for example, to accompany him to football. In both cases, slavery, yes or no. Forcing a lady who accompanies me to dinner, yes or no, is a slavery because she no longer wants to come and they force her to spend an hour with me because the law mandates it. I can't explain myself. For the one who has the right to health means that other people have to be working for a quarter of an hour or 20 minutes to pay for their health ration. In any case, the case may be different, obviously, but in essence it is not different. Well, it is. That's why I say that I have the right to have something. No, I have no right to have anything, nothing positive. I have the right to be left alone. It is another thing for me to have a moral, ethical or religious duty, whatever it is, to help others and the poor. But I decide that I don't help. I decide that I help my neighbor, not the general neighbor, but the concrete neighbors. I don't explain myself, but of course you say that I have the right to the house. Then I get into bed there. When I got to her house, I'm there with my boots on, full of mud on her bed and eating it in the fridge. I have the right to housing. I tell him, I explain myself. Food arrives. I would say so, yes, he will say, but not at my expense. I would tell you if I explain myself. And what a difference is that when I go into his house with my boots and I lie down on his bed to take the equivalent money to pay for a room. If I explain myself, Pito is different, I know the distinction, but in essence it is the same. I don't know what you think, because the welfare state is based on these philosophies. Tomorrow we will talk a little about this and continue with the following ideologies.